All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Trust you all had a bit of a breather and a bit of a stretch after an inspirational start this morning with Dr. Maya Shankar, all about behavioral science and the power of nudges to change people's minds. And to those of you who've just joined, welcome to Asian Development Bank's Knowledge Forum 2021. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm delighted and honored to be your host, your guide for the next hour focused on investing in women and taking stock of where the private sector and beyond has progressed in driving inclusive innovation to launch the CEO Talk series, which is all about leveraging this platform for growth so that you can bridge your leadership for positive, sustainable change as we emerge from this crisis. To kickstart this session, I'd like to now invite Suzanne Gabriel, Director General Private Sector Operations of the Asian Development Bank, to deliver her opening remarks. Suzanne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And that was a very enthusiastic entrance, and I hope I can continue that. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world, and greetings from Montreal. I'm really delighted to be here today, colleagues, partners, speakers, guests, and friends, to the first event of ADB CEO Talk Series, a new knowledge platform enabling ADB clients to interact with counterparts and ADB staff to understand a broader range of perspectives from respective industries and approaches to managing new business models in different contexts. It's quite a strong message we're sending today to launch the CEO Talk series with a dialogue on the power of equality and diversity on business benefits with a positive social impact. We can reflect on those impactful actions we can take to drive change and innovation towards achieving the goal of equality and inclusive opportunities for women. What a timely discussion we're having today on giving visibility and value to developing an inclusive private sector. There is much to talk about on women's economic empowerment, but it is less clear what this actually means. Empowering women is about enhancing their access to resources, including financial, human, and social capital. This translates into credit and finance, capacity and skills, and social professional networks of peer industries, amongst others. In all of these areas, the private sector is endowed to deliver, and we trust that this can happen. It is already happening. Women's life stories are plagued by what ifs, and I think many of us have experienced that. What if I have had a chance to get that job as a manager for operations, for example? What if my transition back to my job after having my child had been easier? And what if someone had noticed my talents and given me a chance? We are now at a time when the traditional clash between work and life experienced disproportionately by women can actually be addressed. The private sector can play a pivotal role in acknowledging the realities of underserved women at work and expanding women's access to quality work. It can provide solutions to not only cope with gender based disparities, but also proactively create favorable conditions for women to step up their participation in private operations in a meaningful way. Within ADB, we are working hard to hardwire gender mainstreaming in all our projects. And I will share more with this as we get more into the discussion. But let me give you an overview of the areas where the private sector can really make a difference. It can contribute to the integration, promotion, and retention of women in its company structures, especially in its leadership. It can accommodate flexible times and work locations. It can plan and mentor for career growth. It can create an environment of transparency in information and communication. It can foster a gender sensitive management and organizational culture. And it can offer leave provisions and services for family well being. And I think the list can go on far beyond that. I think in closing, women need opportunities to build strong and competitive business skills. And I hope you will enjoy today's discussion with our wonderful speakers. And without much further ado, I'd like to hand the stage back over to you, Sarah, to take us back through the landscape of gender equality, diversity, and innovation in our corporate world and what we can do to improve it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne. And indeed, what a strong message from the Asian Development Bank to be starting off this important platform, this CEO Talk series, by placing first the conversation on gender equality. Because we, all of us here, know today that this is the anchor and bedrock of growth in our communities. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to begin today by inviting you all to join me on a journey. And we begin 50 years ago when ADB was first founded. 5 decades ago, most countries in the Asia Pacific were poor, facing significant liquidity constraints and limited access to finance. Fast forward years later, while we do have more work to be done, many member ADB countries today are middle income, and Asia Pacific is almost synonymous with emerging growth and explosive growth. And alongside, or perhaps I argue, core to this economic growth is that things seem to be looking up for women in the region. We are seeing more women in leadership, more conversations on gender equality, and of course, who could forget the global Me Too movement that placed a spotlight on not just the business community, the corporate community, but on our humanity as a whole, raising questions about how we interact with each other and what it is that we have all truly condoned. I argue that it also places the important question before us. If we leave the world as it is today, is this the sort of world that we are proud to live to our daughters and our sons? Or are we capable of doing better? The good news is that today, globally, women are graduating at a much higher rate than ever before. In Malaysia, where I come from, women make up 50.4% of local graduates, and that number is steadily increasing. Across many countries, women make up about half the labor force. And women in some pockets are making strides on the political front. In Asia Pacific, women's representation in parliament has increased over the past 2 decades, while only 13% of seats in national parliaments were held by women in 2000, excuse me. This figure rose to 20% in 2020. And while I'm an optimist, we all know that this only tells one side of the story. While women make up almost half the labor force worldwide, today they hold, at best, by region, 30% of managerial positions. In some of the worst performing countries studied by the World Economic Forum and recently, yesterday, by the Credit Suisse Gender 3000, women make up less than 7% of managerial positions. Those countries include, ladies and gentlemen, Japan and Pakistan. Despite talk of women in the boardroom and encouraging results with female board representation ranging from 33% in Australia and New Zealand, it is a lowly 9% in South Korea. And even more embarrassingly, while some markets have implemented gender quotas on boards and have achieved the highest rates of female board participation, this number does not follow through in the number of CEOs. And that number tops out again by region in Europe at 6.7%. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, the elephant in the room. The fact that women have been pushed out of the workforce through COVID 19 and that these loss of jobs cost women around the world at least 800 billion in earnings, a figure that is more than the combined GDP of 98 countries, according to Oxfam. Why should this She session alarm us all? Because the resilience and the growth of economies depend on women's workforce participation. Because women's earnings are crucial for many families' economic security. Because if women participated in the economy identically to men, we know global GDP would increase significantly. And ultimately, make no mistake, there will be no post COVID recovery without women's economics post prospects recovery. Often I'm asked, what is the answer? How can we change this? And of course, the problem is nuanced. It is structural, it is cultural, it is institutional, and we will be discussing some of this on the panel shortly after this. But I think the answer starts with us all examining the lens to which we evaluate our world. A quote I like is that we live by the paradigms we know. And until you and we collectively change this paradigm, nothing will truly change. How are we raising our sons and our daughters? I come from a region, as many of you, where this term of leftover women or Shungi, is still very much alive. The concept that she, after a certain age, call it 28, 29, and is unmarried, she's leftover, expired goods, which means that still in 2021, ladies and gentlemen, we are judged by the ring on on our fingers and not our professional success as women. And though you might think this cannot translate to the numbers that we just talked about, think again. Are we letting our boys play in the dirt and experiment in the sandbox and telling our girls not to dirty that dress, stay clean, and be careful? Are we still placing the burden of parenthood, which, by the way, is a two-person job, on the shoulders of women alone? For months, global job reports have painted a dire picture of the pandemic's deep and disproportionate impact on women. Many blame the pandemic entirely, but what the pandemic has truly revealed is the shaky economic ground for which women have always stood. From their overrepresentation in vulnerable and informal sectors to the lack of high quality care services to closed schools and the persistent unpaid care burden, this pandemic has taken what was already a precarious economic situation and sent it spiraling out of control. Urgent government action is required. But, as Suzanne Gabriel has mentioned, the private sector also has a unique and essential role to play in keeping women on their payrolls and stopping this regression in its tracks. As leaders, as financiers, and investors, we have to take an opinion on what our future looks like. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where we go deep today. I am so excited to now turn to a distinguished panel to discuss tactically what the private sector can and must do and what we can all learn from them in their journey of inclusive innovation. So now, please join me in welcoming our next panel, Investing in Women for Stronger Businesses. And first up, I have Andre Filuen, Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of Fiji Airways. Bula, Andre, how are you?
Hello, Sarah. Very well, and you? Nice to talk to you.
Nice to see you. And next, I have Roshani Zafar, Managing Director of the Cash Foundation. Roshani, how's Pakistan doing?
Good to be here. Thank you, Sarah.
Good to see you. And finally, once again, welcoming onto the stage Suzanne Gabriel, Director General of the Private Sector Operations Department of the Asian Development Bank. Welcome back, Suzanne. It's good to have you back.
Excellent.
Great.
Thank you very much. I've unmuted myself now.
And we might have a couple of those, but right now, virtual reality is the new reality, so we'll get used to it. So let's get started here, ladies and gentlemen. The first question for the panel, and perhaps Suzanne, I'll start with you, just to continue the thread from our conversation earlier. What does inclusive innovation mean to you, and what role do companies and organizations like yours play in advancing this goal?
Thanks very much, Sarah. It's a really interesting question because I think inclusive innovation means different things to different people. But pardon me, from a development finance perspective, this I think also covers risk innovation. It's about your risk appetite, and for me, it's about moving away from the perceptions that failures for women's businesses are called out, and providing an excuse, for example, to avoid financing women-led businesses as a target. It's also about empowering the potential of both male and female employees and managers to address gender stereotypes. I think we need to actually provide the guidance and help in what does that mean. It's about personal leadership as a role in advancing diversity and inclusion, to not accept or certain behaviors or accept certain behaviors or encourage that. And I think that that's also what leadership is about. And I think it's about, we were talking about risk innovation. It's also about giving women opportunities that they may not otherwise have. I think that, banks like ADB, which are traditionally infrastructure banks, have been involved in heavily traditionally male-dominated sectors. I think that we can actually provide leadership and direction on this about mainstreaming or bringing in gender inclusion type of opportunities, but also having the risk appetite to do that. So it covers a whole broad range of areas, and I think that we are definitely striving to a more inclusive and innovative model. Of course,
Yep.
we don't have it all figured out yet, but I think that working together, I think, is the most important part of it. It's a partnership, and I think that we're all very focused on achieving that goal.
Thanks, Suzanne. And, talking about risk and women, who better than to address this issue than Roshani herself? I mean, Roshani, you have had really an illustrious career, meeting Dr. Yunus himself, who encouraged you to go and do it in Pakistan and include the women and make this happen, and gave you a 10,000 check, as I understand it. So talk to us a little bit here on just how women are used to be viewed as a risk, but in fact you've actually seen the opposite.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think the point that you raised about the cultural constraints that women face, those are the ones that really permeate and prevent women from being included in the economy or in decision making, or what we call creating economic agency for them. So just to answer, the question of what investing in women really means and how are the risks panning out, I think it's all. The first thing is what I say now is it's not even about being gender centric when we design financial products. We have to be gender intentional, which means that we are very clear in understanding the challenges that women face as an entity, and then designing around them. Designing around those challenges so we can help women make better financial decisions. If I go back in time, one of the things that's really worked for women when we were going out there to do research, when we were setting up Kush, one of the things we realized that there was safety in numbers when it comes to women. Women prefer to be associated, or the notion of being together as a group was something that worked for women. So the concept of group lending is what we saw in Bangladesh. I learned from Dr. Yunus's experience and brought it back to Pakistan. The idea was that we set up groups of women who would take joint responsibility for each other. And that really worked, because women alone having to configure and to transact businesses was very scary. Because there were two insurmountable challenges when it came in terms of not just the economic barriers, but the social barriers that we faced. So one of the things we did realize is, if you're gender intentional, you wear the lens, the point that you were raising, we really need to change the way we view women. That was one. The second piece was really investability, demonstrating the case for investing in women. So when we started out in 1995, for every dollar that was provided as microloans in Pakistan, only 20 cents went to women. So women were really not part of the bandwidth. And when we went out there to see the 20% that were being served, it was men who were using that money. So it was given to women, but the agency or the pipelining or the use of the money was with the men. So one of the other things we had to do was, and I think that's something we all have to do even today, because there are still questions around why women, why do we need to invest in them? I think we need to put that debate aside and really show the evidence and the numbers. So I will talk a little bit more in the rest of the panel, but one of the things we did do was we demonstrated that investing in women, setting up an organization that caters only to women, and women's running micro businesses across the country could be sustainable. Kush was the first organization in Pakistan in 2003 to become sustainable as a microfinance entity. So we showed that not only were we investing in women, we were providing them loans. Women were better credit risk. They invested in businesses that earned them revenues, and ultimately they invested in their families. And the institution that supported them was also sustainable.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the African proverb: if you want to move forward, you invest in women, and women will bring the world along with them. And to this point on investability, although I think a lot of us here know that the business case is so strong for investing in women, and we're almost selling to the soul, but I don't want to forget about the others who are just tuning into this conversation for the first time, and we're hoping to have more converted as we continue on this panel. And I want to turn this question to Andre. From a corporate perspective, why does it make sense to invest in women, and what are some of the results that you've seen? I understand you have something like a very wonderful women-led finance team, which made a lot of difference. Talk to us a little bit about that, Andre.
Well, Sarah, first of all, women, you need in any strong leadership team a good balance of masculine and feminine energies. As you know, they bring different values. I find the men are very results-driven, not very open, not prepared to really sit down and focus on exploring and considering many alternatives. So, that's the experience we found. But my personal experience here was I had, when I joined, a CFO, a male CFO of the company who was very self-preserving, more focused on not sharing than really sharing. And he went on leave, and I soon discovered that below him was a financial controller, a wonderful woman who was highly competent and very, very capable. And then one day I said to her, her name's Naomi, what's your ambition? And she said, well, obviously my ultimate dream would be to be a CFO, but it will never happen because that position is decreed to be a male position, always going to be a male. So I gave a lot of thought, and the individual that was in the role had a few months left on his contract. So I terminated his contract a bit early and put Naomi in. And I was absolutely amazed at how the entire culture of our finance department changed overnight to one of transparency, openness, innovation, prepared to consider all initiatives. And we've achieved unbelievable advancement with this finance team. And today we have a team of 57 persons, of which 55 are women. And we've set and developed new financing structures that are absolutely, I can only say, awesome. We've had international financial institutions tell us that no other major airline in the world has come up with the type of creativity we have. And I have to attribute that to this change in culture of not being self-preserving and ego-driven to being open and collaborating and engaging.
Yeah, and Andre, I mean, just to dive a little bit deeper on that, you mentioned culture, and the intention of this panel is for all knowledge experts here joining us today to be able to also take home, what are some of the tactical steps that we can take here? How do you build for a culture of inclusivity, and how did you approach this in your organization?
Yes, a very big change that you need is you need to go through a substantial program of, I would call it neuroscience development in the organization. What we need to let people grow into is understanding how to change their mindsets, how their thinking drives their state and their behavior. And we've invested initially with a leadership group of 40 persons, of which 50% were women, and then expanded it to the leadership team. And now the whole company has gone through it. And we coupled this together with Ron Kaufman from Singapore's Up Your Service program, where we've gone through this education, where our people today have become far more open-minded. They're far more mindful. And I think until you do that, you're going to have these biases and blocks that are going to be very difficult to overcome. And that's been a huge factor for us. It's certainly the catalyst and the foundation that has led to the improvement we've got in our culture of being open to diversity, supporting it, welcoming it, and embracing it.
Absolutely love that. And I think it's interesting that you actually brought in a third party, an independent third party, to help with this resistance, right? I mean, we were talking about the power of the nudge and how to change mindsets and things like that. And sounds like you brought in the right person to help with shifting things. But did you also feel you had to let go some people? Was that part of the journey?
Well, I was going to say to you, what's the formula for this to be successful? It starts with a commitment right from the very top to bring about the change and to drive and improve the inclusion of women in key roles. then you need courage and you need to be very bold, because there will be a lot of resistance, and that's what we found. But as we improved and got more of the neuroscience development across all levels, this has become easier and there's less resistance by far today. And I think generally we've seen the entire organization embrace the enormous benefits that we've got from the inclusion of women in key roles. On our service side, we have won some of the major awards in the world for service. Small little national airline delivering service at standards that the big airlines struggle to deliver. We've also, for example, with COVID, our travel-ready health and safety measures, protocols, and program has won 2 major awards, and we're only one of 5 airlines in the world that have achieved this. And the teams that have driven all this are our women. And I have to stand back and say, wow, would we have done it without them? And the answer is clearly no, I don't believe so.
Yeah, love that. And Andre, there is a question for you, but I'll come back to you with this question, and maybe you can think about it on what it will take to convince other private sector companies to embrace inclusion of women. But before you answer that, I did want to turn to Suzanne, talking about the private sector, public sector. ADB, of course, sort of sits front and center of that. And, what I'm sort of insinuating is the concept of blended finance, right? Where blended finance has been said to be the tool to unlock opportunities, that where there are areas where, we need to address some of the inequalities, this might be the tool that we look to. Has this model worked, and what have we learned from this?
Yeah, I would agree with you that blended finance, compared to a few years ago, is certainly an instrument that we've been using far more extensively across the board to bring the private sector in. Again, as you say, it's one of the key tools that we're trying to drive more innovative financing approaches, because what it does is it combines concessional finance from donors or third parties with monies from the development finance institution's own normal account, and or commercial financing from other investors. And the whole intention, is to de-risk projects from various angles and to help create an enabling environment to attract and encourage private sector involvement to deliver impact. And that's, the primary focus of that. So for example, I can give you an example where ADB has worked with Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, and we recently launched a blended finance initiative for Asia and the Pacific. And the Australian Climate Finance Partnership, ACFP, lots of acronyms, seeks to scale up low carbon sectors and climate adaptation initiatives in eligible countries in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. So what the Asian Climate Finance Partnership does is it grants financing, but it also seeks to promote gender equality and better economic opportunities for women. So we're using various instruments to try and crowd in different approaches, innovation, and in addition to blended financing, the ACFP's grant funding will also support the development and implementation of technical assistance for, terms that we're using about gender mainstreaming and gender initiatives. So the whole idea is to include gender as an aspect in all aspects of the business, from the boardroom all the way down to the service and suppliers. So, that way we can, through the private sector operations, we can help create an enabling environment for gender mainstreaming, and also financing for climate and renewable energy, which, as we've said and heard, is a traditional area where it has been male dominated in the past. Inroads are being made, but I think that blended finance tools like this are ways in which we can seek innovative tools to help change the direction and change the narrative on this.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you give a couple of examples there, Roshani. I mean, this one's for you. Being on the ground, I hear you've also discovered along the way a lot of emerging needs from your customer, the women. Where insurance, different items like that came to be. Talk to us a little bit about whether working through a blended finance way, i.e., working with government grants, government funding, and sort of engaging private sector. I know you had to sort of engage the insurance industry, for example. How did this work for you? What did you learn along the way in this process?
That microfinance is not rocket science. You can pick up products from any country and replicate them elsewhere. It's really mindset change that has to work, and that's going to be your challenge. How do you help men and women and communities and societies change their mindset around women's economic agency and economic roles? So that's really been the challenge. When we started out, we started as a microcredit program, but with time we realized that there is an entire value chain that we need to create that will alleviate the challenges and obstacles that women face. So we started with providing credit. Then we introduced leadership training. So the point that Andre was making earlier also, there has to be a diversity and inclusion code invested in the organization at every level, whether it's the clients that you're serving, or whether it's the managers you're creating, or whether it's the board that you have. So when we look at Kush, when we shine a light, the idea is that diversity and inclusion is part of our DNA. It's the raison d'etre of why we function. And that becomes very important. And as I said, you sometimes have to just belabor a point, and sometimes just say, well, this is the way things are. So when we started, when people came to us and said, women don't work in Pakistan. You're not going to find women managers. You're not going to find women loan officers who are going to go out in the field. We said, no, of course we will. We will challenge this, this myth and break it and debunk it. Similarly, we were told that women don't run businesses. They facilitate men. They support men, but they're not entrepreneurs. However, we debunk that myth as well. So sometimes you just have to shake the ivory tower and demonstrate the counter to that. When we started, as I said, we started as a microcredit program. Then we added trainings and capacity building on financial education, business management skills, leadership, even reproductive health. Because one of the things we saw is that a lot of times women are overburdened. You mentioned the notion of unpaid care. So we realized that we need to target the women. But when we went out there to talk about reproductive health, we realized the decision-making is not in the hands of the women. It's in the hands of the mother-in-laws, for example. In my culture, mother-in-laws are very important. I'm sure that's the case in other cultures as well. So we targeted the mother-in-law. So what started happening is we started developing circles within circles. We looked at the entrepreneur, then we looked at the next circle, which was the family. Then we looked at the society, and we looked at issues that were, impacting her. So then we added social advocacy as an area for us to work in, where we work in communities and we raise issues like girls' education, child marriage. All these things are gender concerns that impact on women's social status at the end of the day. So then we started looking at media. We realized media has a huge role to play in changing the way women are viewed. So we started working with the media, and we started producing drama serials that show women not as victims, but as protagonists who can change their lives, who look at situations and come up with solutions. And this is not generally done in mainstream media. And then ultimately, we also needed to do a refresh for the organization. And I'll just stop there because the story can be very long. We started as a women-only organization. So from 1996 to 2003, we only hired women. And as Andre was pointing out, the mix of feminine and masculine is very important in an organization. And diversity and inclusion is just not about saying you hire women, but it's also about bringing men and women at par and creating a level playing field. So that's what we then started doing. And after 2003, we started hiring men, and we wrote a D&I code. We wrote a mission statement for ourselves on diversity and inclusion. We do a lot of gender sensitization training for our male staff and our female staff who've never worked together. So, these are all the things that we had to do on the fly as we were developing. So it's not just about customers, but also the institution.
And I absolutely love that, right? Because I mean, at the crux of it, you're trying to solve one issue, but you realize that there's so many other structural barriers, so many other, I guess, tentacles that result in today's reality, to what I said in my opening remarks, in that, the simple comment as a parent to our child in the sandbox matters. And that matters with role modeling and so on and so forth. So really excited that you're taking all these steps and taking a really holistic approach. So now the question, the hard question that I like to pose to all of you, and I'm going to start with Andre here. COVID-19 has been tough for a lot of us. And the reality is that in a time of crisis, in a time of heightened risk, a lot of leaders are almost backsliding. And I see this in my world in venture capital, that people are backsliding to pattern matching patterns of the past, right? So pattern matching can be a mask for unconscious bias. That's something I say a lot. How are you in Fiji Airways being careful about, moving forward here post COVID? What is new normal? What does building forward look like?
Sarah, we realized very soon when we started grounding our entire aircraft fleet and suspending all our services that the way we had done business, what got us there, wouldn't work in the future. So we did a lot of research and we adopted a future fit strategy, which started with creating a common purpose. And we got our entire workforce together in what we call Talanoa sessions. These are discussion sessions where everyone has a voice. And we brainstormed a new common purpose. We came up with working together and working as one. So individually and together, to ensure we survive and that the moment borders reopen and we start flying, we thrive. We then used the same Talanoa sessions to put together programs of how we're going to ensure we survive. So, of course, we started with cash, we started with new financing, but we also said this is an opportunity to revamp the entire organization. So we got all our women, all our men, and we started putting women in new roles where we needed more innovation and more intuition and a lot more exploratory work done. And today we have revamped 65 key parts of the organization, new software programs, new structures, and we are a leaner and meaner business going forward. We also then, under the Thrive, had our teams working around the clock with a number of programs. We have travel ready, we have people ready, we have fly ready, we have commercial ready, and all these programs have many aspects to them of how the minute we start flying, we are to go and maximize the benefit we can for the company. And so we haven't seen it as a negative. We've also used the time to dig a lot deeper into neuroscience. We brought in specialists on NLP, on Enneagram, and we've changed the culture to a learning organization, where previously it was a select few that were the privileged to get learning. We have a much wider learning base today. And I've never seen such, I've said the other day to someone, the people here are so hungry to learn, I can't give them enough. And I can tell you that culture change came from the women in our team. And I've seen the men shifting as well. So it's very, very positive. And so we're really looking forward to, I say to everyone, I can start flying tomorrow. We're targeting 1 December, but I wish it's tomorrow because we're so ready. And the team have made it happen like that by including them, by having women driving innovation and that common purpose that we live, eat, and sleep every day in the organization.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that, and do want to get you to be, further specific on answering the previous question earlier in the panel, where the question was to you, Andre. What will it take? I mean, you're an enthusiastic leader, right? We feel that in the energy that bounces off the screen, and that you see the opportunity for everyone to change and build this culture and embed that. But not everyone is like you. Not all leaders believe in this, and especially in more conservative countries. I remember where I felt being weird as a feminist in Malaysia. So how do you encourage other private sector companies to embrace this and to embrace inclusivity and prioritize this?
Yeah. So Sarah, many years back, as a chartered accountant and a finance person, I was stuck in the same mold. As I said, a lot of our males were in the company, and that is results driven and people didn't matter. And it takes an event to wake you up. And we've seen that with the organization. I've had to wake up the organization. And we've realized that in Fiji, we need to do the same. So we have created a thought leader group of mostly women who want to do and improve and change the country to go down the journey that we are role modeling. And that is to start bringing about a learner environment where you learn about how you function as a human being, how you, by managing your thinking, you can improve your performance, you can get the very best out of yourself, out of the organization. And I would say it isn't something you can go and buy. It needs a process. And Ken Wilber has a systemic process that you can use, which is what he calls waking up, cleaning up, growing up, and showing up. And if you follow that type of thing, wake up, you need something to trigger the desire and the commitment to make a change. The cleaning up is getting rid of all those biases and all the, those, if I can call it, blockages that we typically have. The growing up is start learning, start getting more learning across all levels in the organization. And the showing up is, leadership is learned. It is not a talent. And we believe strongly that you have to go and invest in yourself, in your self-mastery, and putting the effort to learn. And so if you're going to go and learn, you've got to practice it. And that's the showing up. And that's what we live every day here. And we try to now, through a thought leader group, spread it wider in Fiji. And I would say wherever you are, invest in this. Get to know yourself as a human being, how you function. Do some NLP. And then go forward and see how you can change things.
Yeah, and I love that. And hopefully your message won't just stop in Fiji, but it cuts across, hopefully today, globally across 2,300 participants that see the power of investing in women as you have. And to that point, everything that you talk about, this one is for Suzanne. We talked about this, given your background, your storied and illustrious career. And this is a question from Chi Nguyen. And I absolutely love this one, which is to talk about different models of leadership, right? There's a need in encouraging women in business and leadership roles, but not every woman wants to be a leader or wants to be an entrepreneur. They prefer being in a supportive role. How do you think about this? And how do we not fall into the trap of this is how a female leader looks like and only the same types of leaders succeed? Talk to us a little bit about your journey too, Suzanne.
Oh, thank you very much, Sarah. I think, it's very interesting. You're talking about different business models or different ways of leadership. And I think that, I really like some of the terms that have been used so far. It's, being a learning organization. I think that it's about developing the people within the organization. And because the people is your natural resource, why would we invest in women? They're 50% of the population. So why wouldn't we? It makes good business sense. And I think that, when you're looking at investments, some of the other things that has already, Andre, you've been very, very good about bringing some of these things out. It's about those balanced views. I think that, statistics has shown, Andre, you've shown, and others have shown that you get better business decisions, better results by including women in this. And for me, it's about, having that perspective of including women in the information that you're looking at the results that you're looking at. And it's, again, if you're looking at the investment quality, it's about the quality of the deal overall. It's about a bankability, which is independent of gender or other social aspects. But, the important thing is to consider is that you need to take these things into consideration. So for example, if you have you see many of these opportunities where women are presenting things and then guys on the other side are presenting things, statistically women will get things funded much less than men would. So it's about having that ability to look at things from a combination of perspectives. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, within the private sector at ADB, we very much have tried to focus on investing in women. We're pushing it all through our programs. We do have targets, for example. I think that you need to incentivize people with targets, and it's about creating those opportunities to incentivize people to include those objectives within this. I'll give you, for example, as of 2020, we've supported, almost 255,000 women have been trained through our private sector operations. We have created opportunities for more than 110,000 women. So these are really material numbers, and I think that through getting the message out, and also by mainstreaming our corporate targets, where we have to have 75% of our targets that need to include gender within that. But you need to be really intentional about that. I do like that word that has been used before, about a bit intentionality. I think is really, really important. And also you need to walk the walk and talk the talk, with all of this. So with this, we've been very intentional with our results. So for example, last year, about 95% of our projects promoted gender equality. I think that's something to really be proud of. And this trend has been increasing. So once again, it's lots of different ways of doing this. Women, like I said, you can't ignore it. They're 50% of the population. Statistics have shown that their balanced views, I think, produce better results. I think that's been demonstrated across the board. For those that need statistics on that, there's McKinsey reports and there's other reports that can actually demonstrate that to you, because it's about impact and return, and you can marry the two together.
Yeah, and I'm gonna open it up to wider Q&A, and I love how the Q&A is going all throughout, because this is just such a hot topic. It seems lots of people have lots to say, but particularly on this, there's a lot of comments that I see here on female leadership and how hopefully you will be mainstreaming that. Roshani, I want to turn to you before we open it up to the wider audience here. From your perspective, as you were working, as you said, right, you never gave up. There was all sorts of barriers came your way, from mother-in-laws to husbands to all sorts of cultural shifts. As someone who has taken all of these challenges head on, and to comments of how women don't want it or may not want to lead, how do you address that comment?
I think, again, Sarah, we need to change the debate and the narrative around women's leadership as well. And that's really been my mantra. It's really about, the debate is whether we believe that women can have it all or they need a seat at the table. So I think we need to do everything. There's got to be a, all hands on the deck approach when it comes to women's leadership. I also think the debate shouldn't be this, what attributes a female leader has to have or what attributes a male leader has to have. I think it's really about having good leadership. And that's really the way we approach it when it comes to Kashf. For example, I really like what Suzanne was saying. To have gender diversity, we need to measure it. What does the institution really, what is the criteria, what are the targets that we have? So when it comes to Kashf, for example, we say 50%, if we open a branch, 50% of the staff has to be women, irrespective. So we don't start a branch or location unless until we get female staff. So the recruitment team has to start with that premise that we need to get and go out there and recruit women and get them on board. So I think a lot of times visibility matters from the policy of the organization. The second is the measurement, as I said. So for example, we have an indicator where we want to see what percentage of our staff is managed by women. So right now, 58% of our staff is directly managed by women. We also measure promotions, for example. How is, a lot of times women within organizations face what we call the triple bind, obstacles, which are not apparent. They're inherent, but nobody talks about them. For example, women are not promoted because it's assumed they won't be able to sit after hours. So a lot of times organizations need to tackle this. As you said, the elephant is in the room. So when it comes to women's leadership, we measure what is the percentage of women being promoted in the organization in a year vis-a-vis men. And sometimes when we see biases, we go and address them. A lot of times it's also training the managers. Now, it's not always enough to have women managers. Sometimes women can be as biased as men are when it comes to promoting or supporting or providing learning opportunities for women. So we also feel that it's important to create managers who are, gender sensitive, inclusive, compassionate, empathetic, irrespective whether they're men or women. So the investment has to be both for the women managers and the male managers. And then, of course, you have to have policies that are sensitive. I think what the COVID has done for us, there's always a silver lining in any crisis. What COVID has done for us, it has made us rethink HR policies. I think HR policies were written by men in the 60s and the 70s. And it's time for us to change them. And COVID has given us that, work from home policies, flexibility, the recognition of unpaid care, of how we need to, pan out and manage this and navigate this space. So I think that's really been a critical opportunity that COVID has created for us. Of course, there are downsides of it as well, but there is a
Roshani, this is an excellent segue as I now turn to a special eminent guest that we will bring on shortly here, Ingrid Van Wiz, Vice President for Finance and Risk Management of Asian Development Bank, to the stage. I really do want to take this opportunity to turn to Ingrid because she's researched the gender gap in the Asian Pacific for a while now, and Ingrid, hi, I know you've aptly recognized that women empowerment is not just an objective in itself, but that it's essential in achieving inclusive and sustainable development in Asia. My question to you, Ingrid, is based on everything that we talked just now, I know we can go on for hours, but what worries you still in all the years that you've seen the progress, but what gives you hope?
Well, I think today's discussion, if we start with the positive part first, what really put a spring in my step is many of the things I heard today and the important observations and experience shared by leaders in this panel at the moment. I think it's about gender intention, being gender intentional, starting to measure it. And actually what the leaders shared with us today is that the transition is already happening. We need to foster and promote more of that transition. I think that's one of the most important things I've seen. The other areas where I found a lot of resonance with my experience is that the change starts from the top. Commitment to equality can only start with management from the top and showing it at the top, making it visible and setting the examples there. If that's not done, the trust is not built to do it. And the other part, which really struck me as well, is the results. The results are not surprising to me, but hear Andre talk about it, I think we should all listen very carefully. These gains are there for every company. These gains are accessible if we look at more diversity in our senior but also junior management teams and in our staff. And if we learn to listen and bridge the barriers, which were also nicely mentioned, the cultural constraints and the patterns that people have, if we can overcome this, there's a whole area of potential of creativity and ingenuity that can be used to address the difficult issues and challenges that are surfacing and we need to address today.
Thank you, Ingrid. And did you have a question? I know we're running out of time here, but do you have one quick question for the panel?
We're running out of time, and I think Andre has already beautifully answered it. But my question related to knowledge and knowledge transition and knowledge sharing. My main question here is, how do you think women can add value or could change knowledge sharing within an organization?
Andre, do you have a response for that? How can women impact knowledge transfer?
Well, I think if what we have in our particular organization is that our leadership development and people development programs are actually run by women. They're in touch with, if I can say, the development side needed, the education needed, and it's made a big difference for us. We used to have that under a masculine team, and it didn't work. And by making that change, because they're more in touch with what's needed, I believe that they have that intuition and also the empathy that you need very often to drive these programs. So I would encourage organizations that are really thinking of this type of knowledge sharing and development if you have a very strong women team, they're the people to lead it rather than the men team.
Thank you, Andre. And now, question for the panel. We have a couple of minutes left, so quick remarks around the table, starting with Suzanne, Roshani, and then Andre. Now that we come to, almost a close here, what is your one message to the esteemed audience, everyone who's tuned in terms of a takeaway call to action? Suzanne, starting with you.
Excuse me. I think that, one of the things that's come out clear is that, from the finance side is it's not just looking at, gender financing or investment just based solely on risk. And I think that is based, still biased, by conservative methods and not necessarily opportunity. And I think that, we also need to acknowledge that the experienced women, have that the experience that they are bringing to the table, including, looking at CVs and that kind of stuff. Women take off work to, for example, to take occasional care of the families or have children or whatever, and that shouldn't be a negative. And I think that you need to look at the skills that this person is offering and what they not necessarily what they have done in the past, but you need to look forward. What skills do they have? And I think you need to be very forward looking on that and very intentional. So I think that, pardon me, pardon me. And so I think that these things are really, really important when we look at what we're doing to develop the next generation of women. I also think it's very, very important for women as ourselves. Sometimes women are, I have to tell you, some of our own worst enemies. We need to be intentional about helping our and empowering, mentoring our colleagues coming up the way, because it hasn't been easy, and we need to create those opportunities. So I think we need to reach out and help someone.
Thank you, Suzanne. And I love that of pushing the ladder down, for other women to reach up. Roshani, call to action for our esteemed audience. And maybe, I'm just pushing you here, but I see a comment on the private and the personal is not something that should be part of the equation. But I know with your work and working with mother-in-laws and so on and so forth as well, like this social element is important. So maybe that could be part of your call to action too.
One of the things we really need to do is to follow a transformational approach when it comes to creating women leaderships, whether it's at the community level or our client level, or whether it's at the level of the management or at the institution. So when I talk about transformation, it's just not about giving opportunities, not just about creating opportunities, but also creating pathways that make it easier for women to move up the ladder. And that comes from designing the products. It comes from the flexibilities that we need to create. It is also based on how we view risk when it comes to investing in women. Just to give you an example very quickly, COVID, organizations that invested in women-led businesses in COVID have done better than those that had male members in their portfolios. So what we are seeing is women businesses are more resilient. I think the other important message I want to give out there is that we need to document the impact that women have. It's very important to do this rigorously. We need to show the impact. A lot of times this is taken as, oh yes, it happens, and it's taken as an add-on. But I really think it's integral to change. It's integral to economic transformation. So we definitely need to do more. And we, as I had said in the beginning, make it intentional.
Thank you. And Andre, final comments before we wrap here. Call to action for people who are tuning in.
I believe you need to develop that very deep commitment from the top to drive gender inclusion and to be, as I say, if necessary, vulnerable if you need help to get there, because we all have biases. And I found I needed help initially to get through that barrier, and to be courageous and bold, because as you heard, so very often these changes need a transformational approach, and it does come with a lot of effort and mentoring and even to the point of where it could be uncomfortable. But if you're committed and you drive it from the top, you're vulnerable enough to get help, and you're committed to do transformation and break through barriers and norms, the benefits are massive for the organization. And that's the message I have out there for the people who are not doing well on gender transformation.
Thank you, Andre. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this really power pack session. I mean, we covered everything from being gender intentional, thinking and designing around the structures that we work around, right? Looking at CVs as hiring managers and not looking at a career break as, oh no, this is a bad thing. And looking at investability of women and also measuring that impact, not just saying that this is the right thing to do, the smart thing to do, but documenting that change and how that transformational leadership really cuts across throughout the organization, and really making it a message, not just from the top, but that rolls through, that is a culture that is lived and breathed in by. So this really brings me to a very popular quote, perhaps to some people, but a quote that I like by Mae Jemison, the first African American woman to travel into space. The future didn't just happen; it is created. And it is my sincere hope that this panel has been helpful to you, in that it's given you tactical steps, and that it's also shown that there are many forms of leadership, that this conversation should be mainstreamed. And as of course pointed out in the comments here, it is not an attack on men. It is not an attack into our private lives, but really acknowledging the fact that our private lives, our social constructs, especially in Asian Pacific, matters, and our tone and narrative matters into what we see in the world. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for this Power Pack session. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for spending this hour with me. My name is Sarah Chen. Invest in women, because it's not just the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do.